Welcome to All Things Marketing Podcast, the podcast that talks all things marketing for both franchise and multi-location marketing leaders. ATM is brought to you by PureDriven. We'll show you how to turn your brand into a money-making machine. Here's your host, Steve Rockwood.
Hello and welcome to ATM. My name is Steve Rockwood and I'm the marketing manager at PureDriven. Today we are going to talk about branding your franchise. I'm joined by special guest Chris Swanson, the CEO at PureDriven, as well as the head of franchise development. Chris, how are we doing today?
I'm doing awesome, Steve. I'm having a great day. We are just coming into that Christmas season.
We are.
And things are starting to really crank up. I'm looking forward to some snow. We don't have enough snow here in northern Minnesota.
We do not. Actually, it's actually quite warm up here. I drove up from about 3 hours south of here today, and the temperature difference was about 25 degrees. It was colder down there than it is up here. So,
yeah, it's a beautiful place.
You guys have a heat wave going on right now. Well, we're going to talk about branding your franchise. We're a multi-location business today. So I guess my first question for you, Chris, is a broad one. What is the purpose of branding?
And it's a great question. It's a very high-level question, as we always talk about the 50,000-foot view that we have, and then obviously jumping down in and kind of drilling in to that. But the purpose of branding is very critical, and we see so often companies that get it right, especially companies that are business to consumer, so an Apple or somebody like that. But one of the things that you really want to pay attention to, if you could just boil it down and get very simple, is it's really a way to tie your organization. It doesn't just have to be a business, but if you're multi-location, whether you're a franchise brand or you're a corporate brand, it doesn't matter. It's a great way to tie your brand. Is a great way to tie together your why, your how, and your what, and it can really create a great brand identity. It doesn't even have to be said technically. I mean, you don't have to go out and actually write it out, in text. But if you do it well, it's easy for everybody in the company to get their hands around that, the why, how, and what, and then basically it becomes a lot of fun if you take your branding to that level. Not all of us have had the opportunity to have the kind of dollars that a big brand campaign can allow you, but by doing this, it's actually a very simple way to communicate your brand, even without large budgets. So it's a great opportunity for people who are maybe an emerging franchise who don't have that strong brand identity yet.
Definitely. And I think the cool thing about branding is if you take the words to a branding expert and you say, this is what our brand is to me, and then they turn that into an image, you get some really cool results that you probably would not have thought about without them actually doing it, because they are the branding expert and you just know what your brand is to you. But when you actually see it in a logo or the colors, you get some pretty cool results.
It is. It's really cool. Having worked with a lot of people who are brand experts that know how to take and work with somebody that's trying to get out of their head, like what they're trying to say from a brand standpoint. If you have that problem, do the why, the how, and the what exercise. Like, why do we do what we do? And it's not always, what you're doing. Your what might be digital marketing, like it is for PureDriven.
Yep.
But your why really is, we're driven to change the world by being a role model business. So we get up every day and get fired up about that why. And then basically you take that and you give your why, your how, and your what you're doing, how you do it, process, and why, the purpose, to that person who's good at taking brand information. They're going to thank you so much, because so often as you talk to people who are in the branding world, they get a lot of, I don't really know. I think this is what I want. And, that's a big struggle for somebody that's trying to build a brand, whether that's corporate, emerging corporate type stores, multi-location stores, or again, whether that's a franchise.
Definitely. So my next question for you here is probably already answered by itself. It's, should you have a brand book? But I'm going to add on to that and say, should you have a brand book, and why should you have a brand book?
Good point. Again, we work with all kinds of companies, and we don't specialize in being a branding agency. So we work with other people that are strong at that. And what I consistently find is that as we go to work with our clients or future clients, as we're working with them, we find that the people that have that brand book, that really understand their brand, it's far easier to build a digital marketing strategy for us. It's far easier to have dialogue with what they're trying to accomplish because it's so crystal clear up front what they want. And so having that brand book, which tells you all the different information, gives you an understanding, a feel of what that brand is supposed to be about, goes a long ways as we as digital marketers are trying to communicate and do the delivery of that brand into the marketplace.
Yeah, and I love having a brand book because it gives me the freedom to go out to different people to have them create stuff for us without me needing to overly explain or to just trust our brand to one person. Before we had our brand book, I basically had to use the same 2 people to do all of the same things for us in the graphic department. But then we got a brand book, and I can kind of extend that brand book to different people, and I can keep it on brand, but have a bunch of different people working on stuff for the PureDriven brand, which is pretty cool.
It is cool, and it really gives you the ability to check back against and say, yeah, that's not, you're off a little bit on what you're trying to do there, and here's why. Versus, you're off, but I can't really tell you why I don't really like what you have done.
Exactly.
Which is another frustrating thing for people who are doing creative work.
Oh, yeah. My wife's a graphic designer, and she will tell you that happens quite often. My next question is actually kind of pertaining to that, and it is, how does branding protect your brand? And I guess that brand book would also play a part in that. So how does branding and your brand book protect your brand, especially in the multi-location world?
Well, I mean, this is a really a big question because, well, first of all, I mean, if you haven't defined something, how can you tell people that something else is wrong? But the big thing that really I think we need to take into consideration as you look at this is protecting your brand. You've made a big investment in that, or should be making a big investment in that. And the last thing you want to do is have that brand potentially get harmed because somebody who's doing design work, further in the company, especially if it's larger, isn't really doing the work that you want to have done, from an oversight standpoint. In the world of franchising, maybe not so much in a corporate-driven model where that creative gets dictated all the way down. Often we'll find that people have started creating their own creative.
Yes, we have.
And it's really outside of the brand. And as you start to look at it, you can see it. It's so obvious. And somebody might say, why does that matter? Because at the end of the day, it's still representing the brand and people don't really pay attention. And, well, you have to think of it differently is you've invested a lot into making sure that brand is really well represented.
Yep.
Not just in how people see it, but their experience they have actually in your stores.
Yep.
And so now all of a sudden you're telling people something totally different. And the human brain knows, like, oh, that's different than, did they make adjustment to their branding? What happened there?
Yep.
It doesn't feel good. Or it looks really unprofessional because the person doesn't really know exactly all the details of what should happen with spacing. And I've seen a lot of really weird things. And so you end up getting into situations where your brand is actually being hurt because it sends a message that you're undisciplined in what you're doing. So a lot of bad things. So what does branding do to protect your brand? Well, having a brand book, having some brand guidelines can really protect the feeling of your brand, the experience of your brand. And again, as you tie that back to your why are you doing this? Why do you have this business? What's the purpose? Your how you're doing things and what exactly you do. If that's the experience that individual has as they come in to check out your store or whatever, buy product from you, then you've really nailed basically everything that consumer is looking for. And that's when you start getting people to be like, I don't want to say cultish, but I'm going to use that word where they start to really love your brand and they start becoming evangelists for your brand and going out and sharing that with other people.
Definitely. And then one more note I was just going to add on when the franchisees are making their own creative and it's not on brand, not only is it not on brand a lot of times, but working for an agency here, I see that it's often not with the best practices for the medium that they're going for. So for instance, if they're making a Facebook ad, they don't use the 20% rule. And they have 90% of the ad with not images, but text. And they don't really know the rules. So the brand book can help them with that as well, because even if they are making their own, if they have a template that they can work on, they're not going to break the average rules that are out there already.
Yeah, there's a lot of policies, of course, out there. But again, some of those are policies because of technology that's going to say sorry, but some of that's just plain what your brand, how it's being represented as people visually are looking at it too.
Yep.
So, but one of the things that we run into, and I think it's important for, franchises to recognize, is the franchisees out there feel sometimes like they have that creative control and they'll jump in and start doing things. And our experience has been just provide them what they need.
Yeah.
Whether you go to an outside creative agency, whether you do that in-house, but make it really simple for the franchisee to do things, because we see a lot of circumventing in the marketplace where the franchisee will do stuff that's outside the policies of the franchisor, and that's not a good thing, obviously. And so we find consistently the people who win in that space empower, give access to, and do things where they build that based on trust, and then they let the franchisee at that local level really deliver exceptional results too.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Chris. That's all we have time for today. Thank you for joining me, Chris, and thank you all for listening to the podcast. We will catch you next time right here on ATM.
You just listened to All Things Marketing Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast to catch every new episode every day. Want to be a guest on the show? Sign up at puredriven.com/guest. See you tomorrow here at the ATM.